I want to be able to take it down and travel with it. It is the sturdiness that I am looking for. Induce our reflex. We all have those that have gone before us that have either influenced or inspired us in some way with our bow building experience. And this next build's got a lot of different influence in it. I have been pretty heavily influenced in my regular bow building by like Tim Baker, Paul Comstock, Dean Torges, and more contemporarily, Sam Harper. Oh, these trees. But this next build is kind of a more interesting take on the influence over a build. And I'm interested in a lot of different styles of bows. If you follow the channel, you know I've built a lot of different kinds. And today I'm shooting my angular duo flex bow. I called it the Egyptian duo flex bow. And I kind of pulled it out and dusted it off because one of the influences that influenced this particular build, I'm drawing upon that influence again after having been inspired to do something different. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about this next bow build, but before I do, I'm gonna go track down these arrows and take another round. Since I've been involved in doing some hunting trips out of state, it's become pretty important to me, or become a priority, I guess, that I get or make a takedown bow, something that's going to travel okay. I'm traveling, flying to get to where I'm going. And so I made a lot of takedown bows recently and have really done a lot to get good at like a sleeve type of bow. But back to this particular design. So the way this was put together was there's not a deflex in the limbs of this bow, right? So this bow is actually two separate pieces of epee coming together with a single back to it. And it was the riser piece that actually was angled, and I laminated the two limbs to the riser. The way I came up with that idea, because it was borrowed or stolen like an artist, the way that came about was looking at one of Sock Trail Archery's takedown bows. That the riser was, by, three-piece takedown criteria, a pretty small riser. It would become, it made it look very much like a one-piece bow with just a couple of bolts on there. So it was kind of difficult to tell that it was a takedown bow, and I was rather taken with it, and I thought it was really cool. And at the time, it was about 3 years ago, I wasn't necessarily interested in making a three-piece bow, but I took that idea, and instead of bolting down my limbs, I just glued them to a riser that was at an angle, and then shaped it such that it was a nice rounded appearance. So you wouldn't know that these two pieces of limb are glued together like this, right here. So I rounded it out, put a power lamp over top and then a backing, and it really smoothed it out right through here. Well, fast forward to lately, and I have another kind of influence or inspiration, we'll say inspiration, of somebody making three-piece bows, and that would be Kramer Ammons, who kind of, I don't know that it was a myth, but kind of made it understood that you can do an all-wood three-piece takedown. And that's kind of where I'm going to go with my next project. So it's going to be kind of drawn upon what I did for this particular bow, off of some designs that I saw from Sock Trail Archery, and then understanding that I can do a takedown bow with all wooden components, because that's really what I want to do. So it's kind of what I have in mind for the riser section. And of course the drawing doesn't quite make sense because everything's kind of arced all the way through, but the appearance of that complete arc is really what I'm going for. So I've got these drawn out, and the light is kind of weird. Here we go. So I've got one that's 12 inches long, the one on top, and the one on the lower side is 16 inches long. And I did the 16-inch one because I really felt like that's what I was going to have to do, but I ended up with a lot of what I would consider like dead space in here. The contact surface is 4 inches. Again, 4 inches here, which leaves 8 inches all through here for riser section, handle, and arrow rest and whatnot, which seemed like a reasonable calculation, but it just, in practicality, it's just there's a lot of space here between the limbs and a lot of contact surface. And so I went ahead and shortened it a little bit to 14 inches here, and then kind of drew out how I would, couple iterations at least, of what I would want that riser to look like. Bottom line is it'd be this thick right through the grip and arrow rest section, and that will be shaped out however I choose to do it at that time. The angled sections here are 3.5 inches long. I've notated where the bolt will go in, and it's in the meat of the bow, or the riser anyway. And then if I were to cut a straight line across here and then laminate some extra across the top, I could get that arc that extends from where the limbs end here and continue on to the next limb and give that sort of appearance like this. What I'm going to do is cut the angle all the way through, and then grind it so that I've got just this gentle sweep in through here. Laminate on the limb, or not laminate, but put the limbs together, get them set, and then I'm going to laminate additional pieces right through here that is going to make it look like the limb just continues right on across the front of that, like it's a glued on riser versus a takedown. So that's kind of the intent here. I am going to use some epay as my limb material. This is just over 1/4 inch thick, and I want to say like 1.25 inches wide. So I've got some good material here. Back it with bamboo, and I'm going to put a really good reflex in there, if not match the design of my Egyptian Duoflex bow here. And hopefully I'm going to go ahead and widen this out just a little. So this is going to be my belly material right here. And then for my riser, I'm going to use a piece of green heart that a friend of mine sent me. Thank you, Jim, for the contribution. And as he noted on here, it is hard. And I kind of feel like it's going to really stand up to the rigors of not only hanging on to the bolt, you know, the assembly hardware, but then also out here on the edges where the limb makes contact and is going to be flexing against the that surface here without damage. All right, guys, so before we get too involved in the laying out of our riser piece, I want to turn my attention to constructing the limbs. This way we can get everything tapered out and then glued up and curing overnight. And at the conclusion of that, be able to turn the attention then to the riser without losing time, so to speak. So I have my piece of epay here. Quick measurements on it. It's about 1 1/4 wide, a little better than 1/4 inch thick, and I'll have all the dimensions published out in the shop manual that I put together with this. So I'm going to record everything so that it's available for later consumption. And then I'm going to use bamboo as the backing. Now, these are all strips that didn't even make the cut for my lots of 3 bamboo that I sell on my website. And if you're interested in doing different bamboo backing type of experiments, I offer 3 packs of bamboo at a great price in comparison to premium backing strips. But these are pieces that didn't even make the cut, and I'm going to be experimenting with them. And what I'm getting from these is at least half of the slat is going to have good node spacing to do this work with. And I've got these 2 right here that match up very well. So, alright, so you can see my bamboo lined up here. I've got my nodes evenly spaced across here, and now I just need to figure out the best scenario for having the limbs on there. Understanding that we're going to have to attach down at the one end here. This. Okay, parts are milled out. The bamboo is very limber, as previously shown. The epay, on the other hand, is still quite stiff. And, you know, I don't know if you guys can see that. There's not much to, oops. There's not much to that epay right there. Maybe an 1/8 of an inch. So that's a pretty fast taper, which means it should bend really well. out here at the tip versus up here at the main portions of the limb, working limbs. So there we go. There are our initial limb pieces. Going to have to make a, basically the substitute or the equivalent of a power lamb for the connection point here. Right? So we're not just going to glue this up and go to town and put it on the riser. We got to have a very thickened up space right here where the connection occurs, just to ensure that we're not bending through the bolt joint where it's connected to the bow itself. We shouldn't have any bending going on up in here. All right, I have found a couple 8-inch lengths of what is white oak here. Have marked off the center line, which gives me 4 inches on either side. And we're going to let the taper on these wedges reside on just the 1/2. So it's going to be very stiff right where the bolts meet the riser, but then a quick transition into working limb. And this acts almost exactly like a power lamp, right? To ensure that we don't get too much pressure come to bear right on that transition point from what is our riser, whether it is glued on or bolted on, and the rest of the working limb here. All right, so I got these dimensions from Kramer's book, so that would be one of those things that rather than mess around with it and find out, I'll take the information from someone who's been down the road, and assuming that the 8 inches is probably good. Here is a trick or a tip for how to get your taper straight across your lamination here, right? So when we go to grind, we're going to grind in a very steep angle here to get this edge, right? And then we take that resulting edge and just work it back until we get here. But to know that you're working it evenly, you just darken the wood like this. And then as we work back on the sander, we'll have our sand line, and that sand line is going to take off this pencil as we approach the top here. And we'll be able to tell if the sanding line is perpendicular to our piece, we're getting a good taper. If we start getting this number going on, we know that we're tapering too far on one side versus the other, and we can true that up based on what we have going on right here. All right, so okay guys, having a block handy is pretty good for helping apply pressure in whichever direction you need to go. I'm running a 40 grit belt on here, and it makes very quick work of any stock. So all right, to start the process here, putting in a pretty steep beveled angle onto the edge of this basically power lamp, and you can see here how it's got a nice beveled edge, like a single beveled edge. Now it's not quite sharp on that very tip, but we're going to start working that edge to the back or to the center of the stock. So what's going on here is a little more grinding to push that back edge or leading edge, however you want to define it, a little further back toward the center of the stock. So basically here we're just elongating the grinding area. Here's an example like I was talking about where the grinding is happening unevenly. The pencil is what's pointing this out to us so that we can make correction and get it back to grinding evenly. So that's really what's going on here, is getting everything trued up again and continuing to work that grind all the way back to the end of our pencil line. As I mentioned before, a block is going to help us to apply even pressure across that length. As you can see here, we have moved that taper from the tip all the way back. And so now it is time to get our finished one long taper, one long feather into place. So along the whole length of that ground surface, I'm taking that length of 2x4 and just pushing it down and making it an even grind all the way up to the tip of the power lamb and or wedge, as this is. I'm grounding different surfaces here just to make sure that we got a nice, even, sharp, feathered edge. It's kind of tough to see the translucency there at the tip, but we are ground very, very, I mean, basically to a sharp edge right there. Alright guys, laying down some plastic wrap on the bench top here, obviously to keep things nice and clean once we get the epoxy rolling. And it's important to protect our surfaces here. For glue up. And yes, you guys just saw that, right? Cut the cellophane like that with a rock. Alright, so we get all our pieces laid out here. And mix up the glue. I have the jig sitting behind me, oops, that we're going to induce our reflex against. So if you're interested in the whole process, gluing up, how best to approach it and everything you need to do, I'll put a video or a card to a video right here about the 9 steps to do or to have in place to get a perfect glue up every time. Okay, the glue up is complete here. Obviously there's 2 separate pieces, but I put in a 4.5-inch reflex here, and then I've got it sitting on 4/4 stock over here. So 1 inch off of the grip end of the limb, and then just an even sweep based on the taper that we gave the belly lamb. While we're waiting on that, we can now get started on our riser block. Alright, I've gotten to work on my green heart here. Have trimmed off a length on the table saw. That actually came off relatively easily. So I think the material itself, as hard as it may be, it's definitely, it can be machined. I would liken it there about like hickory or ipe. I'm not tracing my pattern onto the wood. I'm actually like transposing the pattern. So I've got my angles all laid out, and I have, you know, done my work to get them laid onto the wood, and then cut on the bandsaw, take it to my belt sander here, and then ground it smooth. And you can tell by the straight edge right here that it is square. So that's the most important piece. From here, you know, we can shape everything out, but I want to, what's most important is to get these parts correct. And before I go through the hassle of shaping everything out, I'm going to actually get the limbs attached to this block. So I don't want to put any more work into this than is necessary before I know for a fact that it's a viable piece of wood for our riser. All right, we have our limbs curing, got them molded exactly the way we want them molded, already glued up and everything else. Got the riser piece ready to go here. If we can get the shadow right, you should be able to see that the just the top of that grind is a perfect perpendicular line across that riser. So we have a good square riser set up here and ready to go. So since we're going to be attaching our limbs directly to our riser in this state, we're pretty much at a stopping point and accomplished everything today that we're going to manage to get done. So guys, thank you for joining me this week. We'll get started again on this build next week, so I will see you then.